Coraline and Encanto both tell the tale of normal girls in magical houses. However, while Coraline has been capturing its audience's heart for over 15 years, Encanto has been forgettable and people rarely talk about it nowadays. This is because the writers of Coraline knew how to use the story structure, while Encanto was written with no actual goal. In this video, we'll talk about how to use the 3-act structure and how to apply it to your stories. I'll use 2 stories that are somewhat similar in narrative to explain how to use it in a proper way. But before we get into anything, I have to say this video isn't to tear down Encanto. I don't think it's a bad story, but it's not a great story either. It had potential, but they couldn't execute the idea to its fullest. What is the 3-act structure? There's a reason why most people hate the outlining process, and it's because we often have misconceptions about the structure, which can stop the writer from pursuing their passion and eventually kill their creativity. Today, I'm going to give you an alternative for using the 3-act structure, hoping this will change your mind if you have problems with it. The 3-act structure is a technique for plotting stories. It divides the story into 3 main acts, each consisting of a major plot point that shifts the character and puts them through an arc. The important thing to know here is that we are putting our character through this story to change them. Each section has its own way of pushing the character into who they should be. But what are these sections exactly, and what does each of them contain? For the 3-act structure, or any structure to work, there's one important thing you should know. The plot and character aren't separate. The plot is what happens to the character or what the character does in the process of growth. These acts each work as a phase of growth for the character. A series of events show who the protagonist is and what they want. Then it shows the process of desire versus need, eventually leading to some sort of climax. But we're going to discuss the details of each act more. For now, let's say that Act 1 is a character before change, Act 2 is the character getting the emotional hits to feel the need for change, and Act 3 is the decision whether to change into a better person or worse, and in some cases, not change at all. Before the outlining process. Before we even begin the outlining process, some things must be clear. The most important part in this section would be the theme. Now, let's take a look at Coraline, but to put a disclaimer here, this video isn't about the conspiracies around Coraline. I'm viewing it in a very technical way. We'll assume Coraline did come back to her real parents and the real world. Coraline's theme would be the change of perspective in our mind. For more on the theme of Coraline, Midpoint, and I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing the name right, has a great video I suggest. Coraline's story focuses on opening our eyes and appreciating what we have in life. This is the first thing that would start the outlining process. After this, we can create our character. Our character, of course, comes to life through the theme. If you want me to touch on this subject, make sure to let me know in the comments. We can create a character who is bored with everything. She doesn't find her life, parents, or anything interesting. It's such a great trick that can also come in handy in world building. The lack of something is effective to actually emphasize on that point. If you want to tell a story about women's rights, you can build a world where women have no rights in it at all. Now we have created a need for our character, but we still require a want. This can go in various directions. We can either choose something the character gets out of the need and realizes the need in the process, or we can make it something that wouldn't bring the character any external harm, but would hit them internally while they strive for it. In the case of Coraline, they decided to go with the one that would bring the character to their doom. This is the easiest one because the character must change to see the errors they made. I'm going to talk about the climax in the section on Act 3, so make sure to stick around until that point. Now that we have all of those, we can move into the actual outlining process. This act is called by 2 names, either exposition or setup. The first name can create misconceptions leading to stories like Encanto, which bombarded us with with exposition. First, we get an expository flashback about why the candle was created and then how the house was created because of it. Then, right after meeting our protagonists, we get a whole song about each family member's gifts, even those with no relevance to the overall story and who serve only as an occasional comedic relief. The name setup can be a better one for this act, as seen in Coraline, which provides a better introduction to the story. Coraline walks us slowly through its world, first introducing our character and then her wants and needs. These are the things that keep the audience invested in the story. Coraline is a girl who wants the world to cater to her desires. Through the inciting incident of meeting the other mother and the other father, she gets a taste of her want. Now, Encanto is really different. 24 minutes into the movie, we get another song, and I hoped this would be the late introduction of our main character, more importantly, her wants and needs, but it provides a want without a need. This creates a situation of flat arcs. Coraline's first act does its best at setting up everything. Coraline's unhappiness, her whininess, and her desire for everyone and everything to change according to her will. But Encanto spends more time on literally everyone else rather than our main character. We get a ceremony of someone else's miracle and flashbacks of Mirabel's ceremony. Act 1 also has a beat called the inciting incident. According to Almighty Google, the inciting incident is an event that occurs in relation to our protagonist near the beginning of your story, which sets the story moving in a different direction. And that's how you ruin your story completely. Let me indulge. The inciting incident is the start of a chain of actions in which the character pursues their want and encounters obstacles, but it usually starts with an external introduction of a new element, whether it be a character or a call for a hero to act. This is a very broad definition that allows you to write with more freedom. But here's another point to it. This start is corrupted through the need. Our character is going to show some sort of flaw, a weak point created by the need. Here's something essential for the character: a wrong decision based on the wrong belief. Coraline must see that there's something very wrong with the other mother, the other father, and the entire other world. But she doesn't, because her belief is that the world must serve her and her desires. That's why she accepts the invitation of the other mother. Another essential element of the first act is the introduction of our antagonist, but it's not just an introduction. It's also important that the antagonist makes a shift in the character's life. This can be mixed with our inciting incident, as it is in Coraline. Here's a list of things that are essential in Act 1. The introduction of our character's desires and flaws, in short, their wants and needs, the introduction of a new problem or a change in their life related to the need, and the introduction of our antagonist. Act 2. In this section, we have a character pursuing some kind of want. They're doing it in a way that's like there's something stuck in a gear and that thing will eventually bring down the entire system. But before that happens, our character needs several pushes to adopt a new belief and realizes their old one was crucially flawed. While you can have as many events as you like, there's a very important event in the second act called the midpoint. This is the transition from a passive character to an active role. Remember that wrong decision? It shows itself either in the beginning of Act 2 or at the end of Act 1. For Coraline, it happens in Act 2, revisiting the other mother's world. Despite sensing how sketchy she is, counts as her wrong decision, made because this world serves her in every possible way. This act has a very important plot point. The midpoint introduces a point of no return, leading up to the climax. It raises the stakes for the second act. For Coraline, this is when the other mother asks for her eyes to be exchanged with buttons. Unlike the other nights, Coraline doesn't wake up in her bed as if everything is back to normal. Instead, she wakes up to realize her parents are missing. For Mirabel, this is when she sees a vision of a disaster. I don't know why Disney avoids conflicts in the first two acts, but instead of actually destroying the house, we just get a vision of it. So So halfway through the story, nothing has happened. The characters are just talking about something happening throughout the entire story. As for Coraline, she's now stuck in a disaster of her making and she must fix it. The second half of the second act shows all the ways she wants to fight back and resist the other mother. This is something I believe people tend to miss a lot from Act 2, because the midpoint isn't the only point of crisis in this act. There's actually a bigger one coming. In the case of Coraline, disaster number 1 would be when the other mother tells her she wants her to sew buttons into her eyes. Then the other crisis comes when she finds out the other kids have had the same fate, while realizing the other mother has taken her parents. Then she starts to make a plan to save them. That's such a better Act 2 than what Encanto gives us, which is story after story about other characters instead of focusing on Mirabelle. Louisa's song genuinely didn't have an impact on the overall plot. The magic is dying and it's starting with her. That's the point of Louisa's storyline, which took up to 20 minutes of screen time. So here's how you can write the second act, which can usually be the most difficult one to write. And if you want a video on breaking down each of these acts in detail, let me know in the comments. But the second act actually involves a few important things. First, we have a character pursuing something in a wrong way. Secondly, this wrong way, driven by their need, is going to bring our character to the midpoint. Then the character can make some kind of plan to right their wrongs, but something darker is coming, another disaster. And it can be more than one disaster. Act 3 of Coraline is all about actions and the realization of the main character while she's fighting the other mother and playing her games. It features an amazing darkest hour when she's sleeping in her parents' bed alone with the pillows that look like them, a great climax with the other mother and her games, and overall good resolution to the story. Here's another misconception that people have about Act 3s, and it's the fact that the crisis comes in Act 3, but the crisis has came in Act 2, and Act 3 is all about confrontation and resolving those problems. With Encanto, it's different. Up until now, we've seen one inner struggle after another with her big sister Luisa, with her mother, and even Dolores, and the fact that she wants Isabella's soon-to-be fiancé. Act 3 introduces 2 other characters and their inner struggles. The first one is Bruno, and the second is Mirabelle's sister Isabella, who has been keeping the perfect image, which was never set up in the story. Aside from that, Isabella's story doesn't have any relevance to the story of the house either, just like Luisa. The entire Isabella storyline was supposed to prevent the house from falling apart, but then it happened anyway. It didn't have any lasting impact on the plot. Another problem with Encanto is that it doesn't quite establish who the antagonist of Mirabelle's story is. Is it Abuela, Isabella, or even Bruno? The story ends with the status quo just the same as the beginning, and that's okay as long as our main character undergoes some kind of change. Not this time. The grandmother, who acted like the antagonist for almost half of the story, magically became caring and kind in the last 5 minutes. Well, Mirabelle didn't go through any change at all, but Coraline gets back to her status quo with a great lesson learned. So what does a proper Act 3 need? As I said in Act 2 section, all the crisis happens in Act 2. So Act 3 consists of several things. First, we have the darkest hour, which is optional but can be very self-reflecting. Then we're going to have the confrontation with our antagonist. This takes up most of Act 3, and at the end we can have a tiny segment showing the change in our main character and her environment. So what does Coraline do that Encanto doesn't, aside from a great plot? The answer might be like really simple, but it's protagonist, and you'd think a company as big as Disney would know better than to not put the focus of the story on one character. But for some reason, they mess up one of the simplest principles of storytelling. Stories are about one character for a reason. It's because it is much easier to put one character through a journey that resonates with the audience than to put 10 people on screen with unfinished stories. storylines, leaving the audience confused about what happened. Having one protagonist, what leads to catharsis, a process that serves as a wake-up call for the audience. Catharsis is the concept that originates from ancient Greek drama and philosophy. It refers to emotional release or purification that an audience experiences as a result of watching a dramatic performance, particularly tragedies. This is where themes come in handy. To have a cleansing effect on the audience, they need to get a message from the story. Coraline can speak to the audience, whether they are kids or adults. I need to add this, I never thought Coraline was a kids movie. It was very scary to me as a child, but Encanto doesn't have anything. What's the message? The older generation is mean, young people can be ignorant. What did it try to say? Because I'm pretty sure they didn't know either. I hope this video changes the way you perceive structures in stories. If you have any requests, make sure to comment them, and see you next time.